When we think of the great ancient empires, we usually picture the same hallmarks of success: vast provincial governments, thousands of miles of state highways, and the strategic assimilation of conquered peoples into a single, unified culture. We credit these achievements to the civilizations we study in school. We look at the Romans, the Persians, or the conquests of Alexander the Great, but none of them actually invented these concepts. To find the true origin of statecraft, we have to go back 3,000 years. The original blueprint for managing a massive territory was forged here, in a small geographic triangle in northern Iraq, defined by 3 cities: Ashur, Nineveh, and Erbil. This was Assyria, the first true empire in human history. They built a system so efficient that every conqueror after them would copy it. Yet they enforced this system with such cold-blooded ruthlessness that when they finally fell, their enemies completely leveled every single Assyrian city to the ground. The victors demolished the temples, looted the royal tombs, and physically buried the ruins. For 25 centuries, local herders and merchants walked directly over these hills, completely unaware that the colossal palaces of a forgotten superpower lay buried right beneath their feet. It leaves us with a strange historical paradox. A civilization engineered a political machine so effective that it dictated the next 3 millennia of human history, yet they were erased so thoroughly that humanity entirely forgot they existed. Assyria didn't start with natural advantages. While the southern plains of Mesopotamia enjoyed rich soil and 4 harvests a year, the north was harsh and unforgiving. By the time the dust settled from the Bronze Age collapse around the 10th century BC, the Assyrians realized a simple geographic reality. To feed their growing population, they would have to take the fertile south by force. To do that, they needed to project power across harsh terrain, which led to their first logistical breakthrough. They domesticated the 2-humped camel. By loading these massive animals with supplies, the Assyrians entirely removed the traditional limits on army supply lines, allowing them to march across arid landscapes that would have starved earlier forces. If you look at the center right of this ancient relief, you can see their second military leap. Until this point in history, horses were generally too small for combat, and soldiers rode donkeys. Assyrian breeders produced larger, stronger horses and created a genuine fighting cavalry. These riders could gallop at full speed and accurately fire bows without the use of saddles or stirrups. Notice the way the riders are dressed. Galloping bareback while wearing a traditional Mesopotamian skirt was incredibly impractical. To solve this military engineering problem, the Assyrians invented tailored pants. These physical innovations allowed them to build a staggering military machine. Instead of pulling peasant farmers out of their fields for temporary campaigns, Assyria funded a permanent, highly trained standing army. At its peak, this force reached nearly 200,000 men. Crushing an enemy on the battlefield is only the first step. The reason the Assyrian model survived antiquity is what they chose to do with the territory after the dust settled. Starting around the 8th century BC, Assyria developed a tiered system for managing physical space. If a conquered city paid its taxes and followed the laws, the Assyrians employed a light touch. Local kings and ruling councils were left completely intact to run their own affairs. If a city rebelled, the local government was stripped away. In their place, the empire installed a highly trained crisis manager, a eunuch. Because a eunuch was physically incapable of having children, he could never found a rival dynasty to challenge the central throne. He ruled with absolute authority, loyal only to the empire. To connect this massive territory, they laid down a network of state highways equipped with relay stations and checkpoints. If a specific region was prone to rebellion, they wouldn't place the provincial capital in the existing local city. Instead, they built entirely new administrative hubs from scratch, intentionally designed to siphon wealth and power away from dangerous local centers. This highly controlled infrastructure enabled their most aggressive and effective policy. The Assyrians utilized mass deportations as a deliberate tool to shuffle and mix diverse populations across thousands of miles. They moved people from Iran to the Mediterranean coast, and people from the coast deep into Mesopotamia. Once relocated, these displaced groups were put through a rigorous assimilation process. The empire erased their massive personal debts, freeing them from debt slavery. They were handed tools and livestock from royal armories and assigned brand new Assyrian names. The ideological magnitude of this decision is massive. By actively absorbing captive populations, instead of segregating them into a rigid class of the conquered, Assyria forged a single, unified national identity. It is the exact blueprint for the modern melting pot, created 3,000 years ago. The ultimate architect of this system's preservation was King Ashurbanipal, a ruler who embodied the central paradox of the empire. Looking at the right side of this relief, we see a king obsessed with cosmic order, lounging peacefully in his garden. He was fiercely proud of his ability to read and write complex languages, and he dedicated his life to the preservation of human knowledge. The Assyrian concept of order required absolute, terrifying compliance. To enforce it, Ashurbanipal kept captive rulers chained in cages at the city gates, and famously forced defeated enemies to grind the bones of their own ancestors into dust. If you look closely at the far left edge of that same tranquil garden scene, you can see the severed head of a rival king hanging upside down from a tree branch. Yet this exact same leader issued an imperial decree demanding that every valuable text across his vast territories be gathered, copied, and brought to his capital. Through sheer bureaucratic force, he constructed the world's first systematically organized library in the city of Nineveh. He amassed 30,000 clay texts, like this dense cuneiform tablet. The collection included Sumerian dictionaries, medical treatises, and the Epic of Gilgamesh. Because they were written on clay, they acted as a fireproofed storage medium. A blaze that would burn a paper library to ash would simply bake these tablets into hardened terracotta, preserving them indefinitely. The survival of our earliest past rests entirely on this one man's obsession. Without Ashurbanipal's meticulous, fireproof archive, the preceding 4,000 years of human history, everything we know about the Sumerians, the Babylonians, and the origins of mathematics would be an absolute black hole. The empire's reliance on terror carried a fatal flaw. The columns of prisoners and flayed skin draped over city gates generated a silent, boiling hatred that built up over centuries. In 612 BC, that hatred finally erupted as a massive coalition of Babylonians and Medes marched on the capital. The siege lasted 3 months, and the vengeance was absolute. The coalition methodically reduced Nineveh to rubble, smashed the royal tombs, and physically buried the core cities under massive mounds of dirt. Then came the great historical irony. The dazzling, prosperous New Babylon, led by Nebuchadnezzar, thrived immediately afterward, precisely because it copy-pasted the exact same Assyrian system. They used the same provincial administration, the same state roads, and the same mass deportation policies, executed by the very same bureaucratic officials. The original architects lay forgotten under the dirt until 1839, when a young English lawyer walked across a scorching hill in Iraq and decided to point a shovel into the sand. He unearthed the colossal winged Lamassu statues that had guarded the palace gates and waded ankle-deep into the shattered remnants of Ashurbanipal's library, shocking a modern world that had completely forgotten this empire existed. Even in modern times, the violence against this memory continued. Looking at this detonation footage from 2015, we can see ISIS fighters using high explosives to systematically blow up the remaining excavated ruins of the ancient capital, attempting to erase them all over again. Palaces can be blown to dust, and physical empires will always eventually collapse under their own weight. But a perfectly engineered idea is indestructible. The kings of Ashur vanished, but every modern state that successfully governs a vast, diverse population is still running on their code.